The storm hit like the wrath of forgotten gods. Dr. Elias Harrow clawed his way upright as the ship pitched violently under him, skeletal masts groaning in the gale. Salt water and sleet clawed at his face, cold needles driving deep into flesh numbed by hours of battering waves. Somewhere above, the first mate screamed orders in a language lost to the roar of the sea. Elias staggered toward the deck railing, eyes narrowing through the deluge. In every direction, darkness. And then a jagged silhouette. Land, or the promise of it. Too sharp, too sudden. A reef. The hull cracked open like a rib cage exposed to air. Water surged below the decks. The world became tumbling splinters, pain, then nothing. When Elias awoke, the storm had departed, leaving only a powdering of snow over twisted wreckage. He was sprawled among the remnants of the morning star, his clothes stinking of brine and kerosene. The sand was black here, volcanic, maybe, and the wind carried a sharp, coppery tang. He touched his temple. Blood crusted his brow, and pain flared down his side. Bruised ribs, maybe cracked. Coldwater. He had arrived. Only days ago, he'd dismissed the dream as a memory warped by fatigue or drink. An old mill cloaked in fog, the shriek of a flute carved from bone, and a woman rotting from within, smiling through the shadows. But when the dreams began to bleed into waking moments, when he stumbled across a colonial journal naming the village called Coldwater and its mill as sites of dire rituals, he could no longer ignore them. 2 weeks later, passage was booked. Now the dead black beach stretched emptily under a gray sky. No gull cries, no surf, just the dull rattle of wind through devastated timber. Elias leaned on a splintered beam and limped forward. Behind him, the wreck lay draped like an abandoned carcass. Ahead, fog clung to gnarled pines, and the faint outline of twisted cottages speckled a distant bluff. Coldwater Village, or what was left of it. As he staggered inland, memories pried their way in. His tenure at Miskatonic University, dismissed as hysteria for proposing that colonial New England had more than Puritan skeletons in its closet. The nightmares had only deepened his cynicism. He no longer sought fame. He sought silence. Closure. If the ritual was true, if the dream woman was real, then stopping it, whatever it was, might mean peace. A low, hollow tone drifted from somewhere in the fog, not the wind. A sound too deliberate, distant yet piercing, as if echoing from within the earth. Elias halted. Cold gripped tight around his ribs, breath frosting in the air. He stared through swirling mist at the dark trees ahead, where the path to Coldwater's heart waited. There was no welcome, only dread, and something old, breathing beneath the snow. The wind hissed through the skeletal remnants of Coldwater like a dirge. Dr. Elias Harrow pulled his coat tighter, his limp worsening with each uneven step across the iced-over cobbles. Snow dusted the crumbling shells of cottages and the shriveled remnants of what once may have been fields. Each structure leaned as if recoiling from some unseen horror. It was as if time had frozen the village in the moment of its own death. He moved toward the heart of town, following a half-buried sign that read Mill Lane. The villagers had spoken, generations ago, of a mill that once pulsed like a heart in Coldwater's chest. Now its remains loomed at the edge of a frozen brook, an ossuary of soot-streaked stone and creaking iron. Stepping through the collapsed threshold, Elias was greeted by silence, broken only by the whisper of wind through the gaping rafters. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of decay and rust. Machines sat like fossilized beasts under sheets of ice. It was here, he knew, that the dreams pointed him. Among the wreckage, half buried beneath a mound of ash and bone, his gloved hand found it, a grotesque flute, carved not of wood or stone, but bone, old and yellowed, etched with sigils that twisted the eye. At its touch, a low, keening pulse echoed in his skull. The artifact. His breath caught in his throat. Unease bloomed in his gut like rot. The bone flute was not simply a totem, it pulsed as if alive, and the cold that radiated from it was more than winter's bite. He recoiled slightly, yet could not cast it away. A deep, instinctual understanding settled over him. This was what the dreams had led him to. This was the object bound to the ritual he had come here to stop. That night, Elias made camp in what had once been the town's stone chapel, its walls barely holding out the wind. He wrapped the flute in oilcloth, buried it deep within his satchel, and tried to sleep. But sleep gave no peace. The darkness behind his eyes unraveled into grotesque tableaus, villagers with hollow sockets and blackened tongues. A woman, or what was left of one, watched him from the shadows, her body collapsing in sections, revealing sinew squirming beneath fetid skin. Her smile was impossibly wide, her voice like a corpse's sigh. "Your breath shall shape the gate, Elias." He awoke shuddering, the fire long out. Mouth dry, lips chapped from the cold, he touched the satchel. The flute was warm. Outside, the sky bled purple above cracked steeples. Vapor-skinned snow fell silent. Bleary-eyed, he rose, knowing sleep would offer no peace. Coldwater was not dead. It dreamed. Something waited. In the distance, beneath the drone of winter, a note, thin and tremulous, wove through the air, a single, ghastly tone. The flute had called once before. The snow fell in mute sheets as Dr. Elias Harrow trudged across the frost-bitten hollow beneath the ruined mill. The bone flute thumped rhythmically against his chest from where it hung beneath his coat, strangely warm despite the piercing cold. He had not slept. The night had stitched itself into his skin, visions of sloughing flesh, hollow eyes, and whispers that needled into his bones. The demon in his nightmares was no longer a figment. It was waiting. The crumbled stairs behind the mill led into a cavern hewn into the cliffside, obscured by decades of peat and debris. A hidden chapel of old gods, perhaps, or simply a tomb of those consumed by belief. Black frost coated the stone walls inside, glistening like diseased lichen. At the chamber's heart, half sunken in permafrost, stood a crude altar of bone and rusted iron. Beside it, no, atop it, something breathed. She was once beautiful. Harrow knew this without knowing why. But now the succubus wore her decay like a wedding dress, gowns of rotted silk and flesh sloughing in slow ribbons from her limbs, mouth twisted into a mocking grin too wide for any human skull. Her eyes, yellowed and wet like ancient parchment, locked onto him with vibrant hunger. "You play our song," she rasped, voice wet with centuries. "But you do not dance." Elias raised the bone flute but hesitated. He had come to destroy it, to cleanse this place of its horror. But the truth quivered just beyond conscious thought. What he had uncovered the previous night in the upper mill returned to him. The village's ledger, brittle with mold, chronicling the disappearances of nearly every villager after 1856. Sacrifices, offerings, beckonings. Coldwater had not withered from abandonment. It had been emptied, bled dry by this demon, her hunger fed by the song of bone and breath. "You kept them here," Elias said, with more anger than fear. "Their souls, trapped in that instrument, a lure for more." "I fed on their yearning," the creature crooned. "Your world forgets desire in death. We do not. This place, this flute, was made for reminding." He could see them now, the silhouettes pressed against the stone walls, frozen in half-formed agony. Their mouths opened in silent screams, spectral forms tethered thinly to the flute. "You want me to play it," Elias muttered. "To finish your rite, open the way." She nodded, bones cracking with the gesture. "It is tradition." But Elias had read more than the ledger. Scrawled in the margins of forgotten parchment had been forbidden symbols and binding litanies. The flute could call, but also bind. Sacrifice, the text warned, would not guarantee purity, only an exchange. With trembling fingers, Elias brought it to his lips, not to sing her into fullness, but to begin the counter-rite. The first notes escaped like diseased birds, souring the air. The succubus howled, reeling back. Shadows screamed, and from the walls the villagers writhed. A crack spider-webbed along the altar. She lunged. Elias blew again, and the world turned inside out. When silence fell, Elias knelt amid the wreckage. She was gone, or worse, buried. The bone flute pulsed faintly in his hands. It had worked. He glanced up at the dark moon overhead. The ritual was not finished, but the tide had shifted. He was not alone. Around him, something stirred. The wind screamed like a torn veil as the moon hung full and swollen above the desolation of Coldwater. Dr. Elias Harrow's breath fogged into the air, each exhale a silent staccato against the steady, pulsing tempo of dread within his mind. He stood once more before the collapsed remnants of the old mill, bone flute gripped in a shaking hand, its surface slick with brine and dried blood. He had deciphered the last glyphs scrawled into the soot-black stones of the boiler room, a forgotten tongue of invoke and bind, remnants of the villagers' final effort to seal the terror they'd unleashed. It was not the music of the flute that summoned destruction, but the intent of the bearer. The succubus lingered, just beyond the veil of visibility. Its silhouette quivered and stretched unnaturally beneath moonlight. Rot clung to its flesh in strips, revealing fibrous muscle and bone crusted with sea salt. Its eyes, if such things could be called that, glowed like drowned lanterns in endless abyssal pressure. Elias lifted the flute and blew, not a melody, but a string of notes that seemed to throb against the world's skin. The entity shrieked, not in pain, but in recognition. This was the rite begun centuries ago, its fulfillment only now approaching the precipice. Wind tore through the ruins, carrying forgotten screams. The ground trembled, cracks spreading like black veins through the stone. Elias carved the final sigils into the ice-crusted ground with trembling fingers, each line sealing his fate. The creature bounded forward, its limbs twisting mid-step, flailing with impossible grace. But the ritual held. The creature was no mere demon. It was a lure, a beacon itself for something deeper, drawn by the flute's call over lifetimes. Elias had lured it fully into Coldwater's thymic circle, the trap etched in ancient stone and burning blood. Pain lanced through him as the last word left his lips, shattering the flute with a crack like thunder. The creature screamed, no, laughed, as it dissolved into emptiness. Eldritch tendrils of dark light laced the air and disappeared, like smoke tugged from burning parchment. Silence pressed in. Elias collapsed to his knees. Snow fell, hesitant at first, then in thick sheets. The wind died. The whispering stopped. Morning broke over Coldwater, dim and uncertain, the sun cloaked behind gray decay. But this was no resurrection. The village remained deserted, its few standing homes hollowed by time and salt. Elias wandered through them like a bleached spirit. The ritual had ended. The gate was sealed. But some cost must always be paid. He was part of this land now, another faded shadow along the ruined lanes. And yet, at the edge of perception, the flute's notes echoed, a distant lullaby from beneath the ice. Elias smiled, ragged, half-mad, and vanished into the fog.